Nora Ashby did not argue when her brother handed her a cardboard box of family photographs and kept the keys to everything else. She held the box against her chest. It was lighter than it should have been for a whole life. Curled snapshots. A wedding portrait gone amber. The truck keys, the house keys, the bank, those stayed in Grant's pocket, warm from his hand. The funeral had ended 2 hours before. The relatives had come back to the house on Larch Street, and there were 11 of them crowded around the dining table. Count them, 11. And Grant stood at the head of it like he already owned the chair. He tapped his water glass with a spoon. He said the house and the accounts were already handled. Then he looked at his sister, and he smiled, and he said the words in front of every one of them. "You take the memories, Nora. I'll take the responsibility." People nodded. Somebody said that was generous of him. Somebody passed the potato salad. What Grant forgot is that Mom named me executor. And the morning after, I signed one authorization he never bothered to read. If you've ever been treated as invisible by your own family, quietly stepped around, quietly counted out, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. Tell me where you are right now. I want to see how far this one travels. Then stay with me, because this is the kind of story that turns slow, and then all at once. Let me take you back a little. You need to know who these people were before you can understand what came for them. Raymond and Della Ashby raised 2 children in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, on a machinist's wage and a school secretary's salary. That was the whole of it. Raymond ran a lathe at the tool and die shop out on Route 9 for 31 years. Della sat in the front office of the elementary school and knew every child's name, and every child's mother's name, and which ones came to school hungry. They were not poor. They were careful. There is a difference, and people who grew up careful know it in their bones. The house on Larch Street was small. White clapboard, green shutters, a front porch that Raymond added himself the summer Nora turned 9. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window over the sink that looked out on the maple. They paid it off over 30 years, and the paying off was done with overtime. Double shifts. Saturdays Raymond didn't have to work, but did. Every extra dollar went to the same place. The house. Always the house. Della kept the money straight. She had a way with it. On the kitchen counter, right next to the phone that hung on the wall, she kept a little blue spiral notebook. Small, the wire coil at the top gone soft from years of flipping. She wrote everything in it. The gas bill, the church envelope, what the roof man quoted. Who owed who a casserole dish. She wrote in a tight, forward-leaning hand, and she never crossed anything out, because she never wrote anything down until she was sure of it. Remember the notebook. It matters more than you'd think. Now, the 2 children. Grant came first, in the good years, when everything about him seemed like a promise the family was proud to make. He was tall early. He was easy with people. He could talk to anyone. And he learned young that a certain kind of charm gets you the second helping and the benefit of the doubt. Teachers liked him. Coaches liked him. He was the boy people meant when they said, "That one's going places." Nora came 4 years later, and she was a different sort of child entirely. Quiet, watchful, the kind who does her homework at the kitchen table without being asked, and notices when her mother's shoulders are tight and gets up to dry the dishes. She was not the one people fussed over. She was the one people relied on. And she learned young, the way second children do, that being reliable is a kind of love you give away without ever being thanked for it. Grant went off to chase the going places. He tried a few things, sold cars for a while, got into real estate on the residential side, then decided the real money was in flipping. Buy the tired house, fix it fast, sell it high. He was always about to close on something. There was always a deal on the near horizon that would change everything. He drove a nicer truck than his father ever did. He wore a watch. And when the deals were slow, which was often, there was a place he could go. Nora stayed close to home. She married young, and it didn't last, and she came out the other side of it steadier than she went in. She hung out a shingle, a one-woman bookkeeping practice, run from a spare room with a good desk and a filing cabinet she kept locked. She did the books for the diner and the hardware store and the vet's office and half the small businesses in Cedar Hollow. She was good at it. People trusted her with their numbers because she was the kind of person who would call you and say, "You're paying too much for this. Let me show you." She was never going places. She was already exactly where she was needed. And she was needed a great deal those last years. When Della's kidneys began to fail, it was Nora who drove her to dialysis. 3 mornings a week out to the clinic in Millbrook, 40 minutes each way, and Nora rearranged her whole working life around it and never once let her mother see it cost her anything. She sat in the waiting room with her laptop and did her clients' books while the machine cleaned her mother's blood. Afterwards, she'd drive her home and get her settled and make the soup Della could still keep down, and only then drive back to her own place in the dark. When Raymond's heart started to give out, that last winter, it was Nora who sat with him. Grant came when he could, which meant he came when it was convenient and left when it wasn't. But Nora was there for the long gray afternoons. She read to him. She balanced his checkbook at his bedside because it worried him to think of it going untended, and she showed him the columns so he could see it was all right. Everything's paid. "Dad, you don't owe anybody." He liked to hear that. You don't owe anybody. He'd worked his whole life to be able to say it. He died in February. Della lasted another 14 months, and then she was gone too, in the spring, and the whole of Cedar Hollow that still remembered came to the church to say so. That's who they were, careful people, and their 2 children, the one everyone watched, and the one who watched everyone. Hold on to that. Because the day after they put Della in the ground next to Raymond, the watching stopped being quiet. It was a Tuesday. Nora had barely slept. There's a particular exhaustion that comes after a parent dies, when the doing is done and there's nothing left but the missing. And she was sitting in that when she heard a car in the drive. It was Grant's truck. She heard the door. And then she heard the side door of the house open, the one off the kitchen, the one that was never locked, and her brother let himself in like he'd been doing it all his life. Which he had. "You're here," he said when he saw her. He didn't seem pleased or displeased. He seemed busy. "I'm here," she said. "I was going to start on the kitchen." "Good. Somebody should." He was already moving through the house with a purpose. And she followed him because she didn't know what else to do. He went to the little hook by the back door where Raymond's truck keys had hung for as long as anyone could remember. He took them down and put them in his pocket. "Grant, Dad's truck's just going to sit," he said. "It ought to be driven. I'll keep it running for you." As if that were a favor. As if the truck were a thing he was maintaining on her behalf. Then he went out to the garage. Raymond's garage, which was a cathedral of a working man's whole life. The pegboard with the outline of every tool drawn in marker so you'd know where it went back. The good socket set. The table saw. The drill press he'd bought used and rebuilt. Grant started loading it. The socket set. The drill. The nice cordless things still in their cases. "So they don't walk off," he said, not looking at her. "You leave a garage like this sitting, people know. I'll put them somewhere secure." Some of that was Dad's from before I was born. I know whose it was. He set a toolbox in the truck bed. "Look, Nora, I'm not trying to make this hard. The estate's basically mine to sort. I've got the time, and I know how this stuff works. You've got enough on your plate. Let me handle the moving parts." Basically, mine to sort. She heard it. She heard exactly what it was. But she was tired, and he was her brother, and the man had just buried his mother the same as she had, and so she did the thing she had done her whole life. She let it go. She stood in the driveway and watched him drive away with their father's truck and their father's tools, and she told herself it didn't matter. It was only things, and she went back inside to a house that felt, suddenly, like it belonged to somebody else. That was the first one. Small, Private, just the two of them. Nobody saw it, and if you'd told Grant it was cruel, he'd have laughed and said he was helping. That's the thing about the small ones. The person doing them never counts them. But somebody was counting. She just didn't know yet that she'd need the number. The next one had a witness. There were bills. There are always bills. After the funeral home. The last of the medical. The property taxes coming due on the house. Nora, as the daughter who'd handled her parents' money for years, went down to the bank on Main to see about keeping things current until the estate was settled proper. She knew the bank. She'd sat across from the same people doing her clients' deposits for 2 decades. She didn't know Grant would be there. But he was, standing at the counter when she came in, and her Aunt Ruth was with her. Ruth Halloran, Della's younger sister, who'd driven over to help sort the linens and had come along to the bank because Ruth did not like Nora doing hard things alone. There she is, Grant said, big and warm for the room. Perfect timing. We're just getting things set up. Set up how? Adding me to the estate account, so I can pay the bills as they come. He said it to the teller more than to her, a young man named Devin, whom Nora had known since he was in her Sunday school class. Family's got to keep the lights on, right? The estate account isn't really, Nora started. Nora, Grant put a hand on her shoulder. He lowered his voice, but not so much that it didn't carry, not so much that Ruth couldn't hear every word, and Nora understood later that he'd meant for it to carry, meant to settle the question in front of witnesses. You don't need to get into the weeds on this. It gets complicated. Estate stuff, tax stuff. You wouldn't understand the numbers. Let me carry it. You wouldn't understand the numbers. To the woman who had done the books for half the town. To the woman who had balanced their father's checkbook at his deathbed so he could die owing nobody. You wouldn't understand the numbers. Ruth made a small sound. Nora felt it more than heard it. Her aunt going stiff beside her. But Nora herself just stood there, because there is a specific paralysis that comes over a person who has been told they're small so many times that they've half started to believe it, and it takes a moment to shake off. And by the time you've shaken it off, the moment's gone, and you feel foolish for wanting to speak. Devin, behind the counter, cleared his throat. He was looking at his screen, and he was young, and he didn't yet know all the ways a family keeps its secrets. I actually can't add anyone to this account without the executor's authorization on file, he said. Sorry, Mr. Ashby. That's just how it works with an estate. He glanced up, apologetic, and there's actually been some pretty significant withdrawal activity on the linked accounts over the years that we'd want to reconcile before we change anything, just so we're all seeing the same picture. The room got quiet in a small way. Withdrawal activity, Nora said, on the older accounts. The ones your folks had for a long while. Devin's ears had gone red. He could feel he'd stepped somewhere. I probably shouldn't get into it, but if you're the executor, it'll all be in front of you soon enough. Grant laughed. It was a good laugh. Easy. The laugh of a man to whom nothing has ever stuck. That's Mom and Dad living their life, Devin. People spend money. Come on. He clapped the counter lightly. Done with it. We'll sort it another day. But Nora had caught it. The way you catch a single wrong note in a song you've heard 1,000 times. Significant withdrawal activity. Over the years. She didn't know what it meant. She only knew that her mother had been the most careful woman she'd ever known, and that careful women don't leave significant withdrawal activity lying around by accident, and that whatever it was, it had been happening for a long time, and nobody had told her. She didn't say any of that. She thanked Devin. She took Ruth by the arm and walked out into the spring light, and in the car her aunt turned to her with her mouth already open, ready to say what she thought of a nephew who talked to his sister like that in a public place. Ruth, Nora said. Not yet. Let me get through the will, because the will was coming. And Nora, who kept the peace long past the point it cost her, still believed, in that moment, that the will would set things right on its own. That her mother's wishes, written down and witnessed, would say what needed saying so that she wouldn't have to. She believed her parents had counted, even if her brother hadn't. She believed the paper would speak for her. She was right about that. She just had no idea how loud the paper would turn out to be. The reading was at Della and Crest, the estate firm 2 blocks off the square, in a conference room with a long table and too many chairs, and a window that looked out on the old courthouse. Marcus Della had done the Ashby's will for years. He was a careful man himself. You learn that people find each other, the careful ones, and he liked Della, and he had a way of looking at Grant over the top of his glasses that Grant never seemed to notice. 11 relatives came. Count them again, because Grant would remember this room for the rest of his life. Ruth, 2 cousins from Della's side and their spouses. An uncle, Grant's ex-wife, there for their daughter's sake, and Casey, Grant's daughter, 24, quiet in the corner with her coffee, watching the room the way Nora used to watch rooms, which is to say she saw everything and said nothing. And Grant himself, of course, at the near end of the table, sure of the ground he stood on. He'd been telling people. That was the thing. In the 2 weeks between the funeral and the reading, Grant had been telling everyone who'd listen that he was getting the house. Not asking. Telling, Nora's got her own place. She doesn't need it. And somebody's got to keep it in the family. And I've got to know how to fix it up. He said it so many times, so easily, that people had started to repeat it back to him as fact. Half the room came into that conference room already believing the house was Grant's, because a confident man saying a thing enough times is its own kind of document. Marcus Della sat at the head of the table. He put on his glasses. He said a few kind words about Raymond and Della, and they were the right words, and Ruth cried a little. And then he opened the folder. The will was simple. Careful people write simple wills. Marcus read it in his level lawyer's voice, and the room leaned in, and this is what it said. Everything Raymond and Della Ashby owned, the house on Larch Street, the accounts, the modest whole life policy, the contents of the home, was to be divided equally between their 2 children, Grant and Nora. 50-50, down the middle. And the estate was to be administered by an executor named in the document, who would gather the assets, settle the debts, and see the division done fairly. The executor was Nora, not Grant. Nora, Della had named her younger daughter, the one who understood the numbers, the one who'd driven her to dialysis and sat with her father through the winter, to stand as the steward of everything. It was, if you knew how to read it, a mother's last quiet act of trust. Della had known which of her children could be relied on. She had always known. She just never said it out loud, because saying it out loud would have started a fight, and careful people avoid fights while they're alive. But she'd written it down, where it would speak when she no longer could. The room went still. You could feel 11 people recalculating at once. Nora sat very straight with her hands folded, and she did not look at her brother, because she could feel him beside her, and she could feel the 2 weeks of telling everyone about the house going hot and sour in the air around him. Grant laughed. It wasn't a big laugh this time. It was smaller, tighter, the laugh of a man patching a hole he can't quite reach. Well, he said, to the room, not to Marcus. That's Mom being fair on paper. I get it. But we all know how this actually goes. He spread his hands, easy again, working the crowd the way he'd worked crowds his whole life. We'll just do it the sensible way. Nora and I will figure it out between us. 50-50, sure. But somebody's got to actually run point. And no offense to my sister, he glanced at her, warm, dismissive. This is a lot of moving parts for a one-woman shop. I'll handle the estate. She can sign where she needs to sign. She can sign where she needs to sign. Marcus Della took off his glasses. The document names Nora as executor, Grant, he said, mild as milk. That's not a suggestion. That's the will. Right. I'm not saying otherwise. I'm saying practically speaking, Marcus said, nothing gets distributed until the estate is reconciled. That's the same for every estate that comes through this office. We account for the assets, we account for the debts, and then the executor oversees the division. It's routine. Grant didn't like the word reconciled. You could see it land on him and not sit right, though he covered it fast. Sure, routine, look, I don't want to turn Mom's will into a whole thing in front of everybody. He turned in his chair. He reached down beside him, and Nora didn't understand at first what he was doing, and then she did. He'd brought the box. The cardboard box of family photographs. He'd carried it into the reading and set it by his foot, and now he lifted it and held it out to her, across the corner of the long table, in front of all 11 of them. Here, he said, and his voice was gentle now, performing gentleness, and that was the worst part. You should have these, Nora. You're the sentimental one. You'll take better care of them than I would. He smiled around the room, and a couple of people smiled back, because it looked, if you weren't paying attention, like a generous thing. Like a brother giving his sister the family memories. You take the memories, he said. I'll take the responsibility. The same words. The same words he'd said at the dining table 2 weeks before. He'd found a line he liked, and he was going to keep using it until it was true. And Nora took the box. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the lowest point of this whole story, and everything that comes after turns on it. Her mother had just, from beyond the grave, named her the one to be trusted. Marcus Dillon had just said, out loud in front of everyone, that Nora was in charge. And still, Grant reached across the table and handed her a box of curling photographs and told the room she'd take the memories and he'd take the responsibility. And 11 relatives watched, and Nora took the box. Because she was who she'd always been, and in that moment, she still believed that keeping the peace was worth what it cost. She held it in her lap. The wedding portrait gone amber, a snapshot of Raymond on the finished porch, squinting into the sun. Her whole family, lighter than it should have been. In the corner, Casey set down her coffee. She was watching her father with an expression Nora didn't catch at the time, but would understand later. It was not admiration. It was the face of a young woman doing her own quiet arithmetic. The reading ended. People shuffled out. Ruth squeezed Nora's arm hard enough to bruise and said, in her ear, "Lo, your mother named you for a reason." And then everyone went home. And Grant went home sure that he'd handled it. Sure that his sister would sign where she needed to sign. Sure, and this is the thing. This is the whole thing. Sure that no one had counted. He was not done, by the way. Handing her the box was the public one. The private pressure came next. And it came fast. He started calling. 2 days after the reading, then every few days. And the calls all circled the same drain. The house. He wanted the house. And now that the will had split it down the middle, he wanted to buy out her half. Quick, clean, before the estate reconciling got in the way. Here's what makes sense, he told her, on the phone, in the reasonable voice. You don't want the hassle of a co-owned property. I'll buy your half. I've got a number that's more than fair. The number was not more than fair. Nora, who appraised value for a living, ran it in her head while he talked, and knew within $1,000 what the house was worth. And Grant's number was a good $60,000 under it. He was offering to buy his sister's half of their childhood home for well below what it would fetch from a stranger, and calling it a favor. I'd want to get it appraised, Grant. Appraisals take forever. Market's turning. I need to close before it turns, or the whole thing's worth less to both of us. You get that, right? This helps you. You walk away with cash and no headache. A pause. I've already got some leverage lined up on my end. I just need to move. And there it was, buried in the reasonable voice. The truth of it. Leverage lined up. He needed the money, and he needed it now, and he needed her to sign fast and quiet, before anybody looked too hard at anything. Let me talk to Marcus, she said. You don't need to run everything past the lawyer, Nora. God, it's a family transaction. He's handling the estate. I'll talk to him. Grant's voice changed then, just a degree, just enough. Don't make this complicated, he said. You'll regret making this complicated. And he laughed, to take the edge off. But the edge was there, and Nora heard it, And after she hung up, she sat for a long while in the quiet, with her hands flat on the desk. She did talk to Marcus, and Marcus, careful man, said the same thing he'd said in the conference room, only more plainly, just for her. "I'm not going to let you sign a buyout before the estate's reconciled," he said, "not because of anything I know. Because it's not done that way, and because once you sign, you can't unsign. We account first. We always account first." He looked at her over his glasses. "You're the executor, Nora. Everything runs through you now, including the slow part. Especially the slow part. The slow part." She held on to that. And then, a few days later, cleaning out the kitchen, the last room, the hardest room because it was the most her mother, Nora found the notebook. It was in the drawer under the wall phone, the one that had always stuck, the junk drawer full of rubber bands and expired coupons, and the little screwdriver for eyeglasses, the blue spiral notebook, the one that had lived on the counter Nora's whole childhood. The coil gone soft at the top. She picked it up, and it fell open in her hand, the way a well-used book does, to the pages that had been turned the most. And she read her mother's tight, forward-leaning writing, and the floor went out from under her. It wasn't grocery lists, not these pages. These pages were dated, going back years, and each line was the same shape, and the shape was this: a date, the word grant, a dollar figure, and a note. Grant, $8,000. To cover the flip on Delroy Saint, he'll pay it back after closing. Grant, $12,500. Taxes, he's behind. Says by spring. Grant, $6,000. Truck repair. Don't tell your father. Grant, $15,000. The deal fell through. He needs it, or he loses the earnest money. He'll make it right. Page after page. Year after year. Her mother's careful hand, never crossing anything out, writing down each one only when she was sure of it, and she'd been sure of every single one, because every single one had happened. The flips that were always about to close, the deals that always fell through, the taxes he was always behind on. For years, Nora turned the pages back, and the dates went back and back, further than she'd have believed. Her parents had been quietly bleeding money into their golden son's bottomless deals. And writing it down. Always writing it down. He'll pay it back. He'll make it right. By spring. He never had. Nora knew that the way she knew the weight of the house. Not one of those he'll pay it back notes had a second line beside it saying paid. Her mother had recorded every dollar going out and not $1 coming home. She thought about Devon at the bank, read to his ears. Significant withdrawal activity over the years. She thought about her father, in the gray afternoons, needing to hear that he didn't owe anybody. And all the while this hemorrhage, running out the back of his careful life and into Grant's pockets. She thought about the care fund. There had been money set aside for Della's dialysis years, a cushion, and near the end it had been thinner than it should have been. And Nora had assumed it was the medical bills, because what else would it be? She wasn't sure anymore what else it would be, and she thought about a box of photographs handed across a table. "You take the memories. I'll take the responsibility." He'd already taken so much more than that. He'd been taking it for 19 years. And he'd handed her a box of pictures and told a room full of people she'd take better care of them, and gone home sure that no one had counted. Somebody had counted. Her mother had counted every dollar in a blue notebook by the kitchen phone. And now her mother was gone. And the notebook was in Nora's hand. And Nora was the executor. Named. Witnessed. In charge of the slow part. The accounting part. The part where everything runs through her. She sat down at the kitchen table where she'd done her homework as a girl. She set the notebook flat in front of her. She did not cry, though she'd expected to. Something else was happening in her, something colder and clearer, and if you'd been in that kitchen, you'd have seen the exact moment the woman who kept the peace stopped keeping it. It didn't look like much. It looked like a tired 51-year-old woman, sitting very still, with a child's notebook open on the table. Grant wanted her to sign the buyout fast, before the estate got reconciled. Marcus wanted the estate reconciled before anyone signed anything. And Nora, sitting there, understood for the first time that these two facts were not in tension. They were a door. Grant was in such a hurry to get past the accounting that he'd never once stopped to wonder what the accounting would find. He assumed no one had counted. He assumed no one would dare. She turned another page of the notebook. Another year. Another Grant. Another figure. Another he'll make it right. She thought about the phone call. Don't make this complicated. You'll regret making this complicated. And Nora Ashby, who had been invisible in her own family her whole life, who had taken the box and let it go and let it go and let it go, picked up her own pen. And on a clean sheet of her own paper she began, very calmly, to write down what she was going to do. She did not call Grant. That was the first decision, and it was the hard one, because 30 years of keeping the peace were screaming at her to call him, to warn him, to give him the chance to explain, to make it easy. She didn't. She let the phone sit dark. Instead, in the morning, she called Marcus Deland's office. She told him she'd found something in the house, a record in her mother's hand, of money advanced to her brother over a period of years. She told him about the notebook, and about Devon at the bank, and about the withdrawal activity, and about the buyout Grant was pushing her to sign before anyone could look too closely at anything. There was a silence on the line. Then Marcus said, "Carefully, Nora, I want to be precise with you. As executor, you have not just the right, but the duty to see the estate accounted for accurately before you distribute a dollar of it. That includes any advances made to a beneficiary during the decedent's life, if they can be documented." Another pause. "Do you want me to explain what that means?" "I know what it means," she said, because she did. She'd done the books for half the town. She understood, better than her brother would ever have credited her, exactly what an advance against a share was, and exactly what 19 years of them would do. "I'd want it done properly," Marcus said. "Not you and me at a kitchen table with a notebook. If we're going to raise this with the court, it has to be airtight. It has to be a real reconciliation, done by someone whose numbers can't be argued with." "A forensic accountant," Nora said. "A forensic accountant. I've worked with one. Priya Venkatesan. She's the best I know. She's expensive, and she's slow, and she does not miss." He let that sit. "As executor, you can authorize the estate to retain her. It comes out of the estate before distribution. Grant would eventually see it in the accounting, but not until it's done. Not until it's done." Nora looked at the blue notebook on her desk, closed now, the soft coil catching the morning light through the window. She thought about 11 relatives watching her take a box of photographs. She thought about you wouldn't understand the numbers. She thought about her mother's tight, sure hand, writing down each one only when she was certain, never crossing anything out. Keeping the record for years without ever once saying a word, as if she'd known, somehow, that a day would come when the record would need to speak, and that it would need a careful daughter to make it speak. "Do it," Nora said. "Authorize the full accounting. 19 years. All of it. Every account they ever had. You understand what you're starting. I understand exactly what I'm starting." Her voice did not shake. That surprised her a little. "And Marcus, Grant doesn't hear about it from us. Not a word. He wants to rush the buyout? Let him keep calling. I'll be warm. I'll be vague. I'll be everything he thinks I am." She almost smiled. And it wasn't a nice smile. And it wasn't unkind either. It was just, finally, level. He handed me the memories and kept the responsibility. Let's find out what the responsibility actually comes to. She signed the engagement letter that afternoon. One authorization. The kind of paper her brother never bothered to read. And somewhere across town, Grant Ashby picked up his phone to call his sister again about the house, sure as sunrise that the slow, careful part of all this would clear away like fog, that no one had counted. That no one would dare, with no idea, none, that the morning after he'd handed her that box, his invisible sister had already set the whole thing running, and that it was, at that very moment, quietly beginning to move. The phone rang the way it always rang now. 3 times, then a pause, then 3 more. Grant never left a message on the first try. He hung up and dialed again, as if the machine itself were the thing keeping him from his money. Nora let it go to voicemail. She stood at the kitchen counter in the Larch Street house, the one they were still calling the estate, and she listened to her brother's voice fill the little room. "Nora, it's me." Again, a laugh, the easy one he used on strangers. "Look, I talked to a guy about the market. It's softening. We close now or we lose the window. You don't want to leave money on the table, do you? Call me back." Love you, sis," he said it like a period at the end of a sentence. She wiped the counter, though it was already clean. She did not call him back that day. She called Priya Venkatasan instead. "How far along are you?" Nora asked. "Far enough to know I need the old records," Priya said. Her voice was flat and careful, the voice of a person who never rounded a number up to be kind. "The bank keeps microfilm on the accounts going back 19 years. I've requested it. That'll take a week, maybe 2. After that, I match every transfer against your mother's notebook, line by line. Line by line. Every dollar. If it moved, I'll find where it went." Nora looked at the blue notebook on the shelf by the phone. Her mother's hand. Her mother's patience. "Do it," she said. "And Priya, take the time you need. Take all of it." That was cycle 1. Grant kept calling. Nora stayed warm. She stayed vague. She'd learned, over 51 years, how to be exactly as much as a person expected her to be, and not 1 ounce more. When he pressed about the buyout, she said the lawyer was slow. When he pressed about the lawyer, she said probate was probate. She let him believe she was overwhelmed. She let him believe she was small. And every night, she slept better than she had in months. The near discovery came in the 2nd week. Casey called, Grant's daughter, 24 years old, the only one at that while reading, who'd watched her father with anything like shame in her eyes. Aunt Nora. Casey's voice was low, like she was in a room she didn't want heard through. "Can I ask you something, and you tell me the truth?" "Always." "Dad keeps saying the lawyer's stalling. He says you don't know what you're doing. Is that true? Are you okay?" Nora closed her eyes. Here it was, the door, half open. One honest sentence and the whole quiet machine would be exposed before it finished its work. Casey would not mean to tell. But she was young, and she loved her father in the complicated way children love the parent who disappoints them, and a word to Grant would undo everything. "I'm fine, honey," Nora said. "Estates take time. That's all it is." A silence on the line. Then he asked me if I knew why it was taking so long. I said I didn't. "Did you?" I don't like lying to him. "You didn't lie," Nora said gently. "You don't know why." "Not really." "No," Casey said. "I guess I don't." But she suspected. Nora could hear it. The girl suspected something was moving under the surface, and she'd chosen, for now, to look away from it. That was its own kind of gift, and Nora took it and said nothing more. She hung up and sat down at the kitchen table where 11 relatives had once crowded to watch Grant divide the world. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. 10 months ago, her hands had shaken opening the electric bill. Now, they were steady, and the difference was not money. The difference was that she had finally stopped waiting for her family to see her, and started simply keeping the record instead. The microfilm came. Priya went quiet in the way that meant she was working, and the silence from her end was the good kind. Nora imagined her at a desk somewhere, a green-shaded lamp, the reels turning, 19 years scrolling past in gray light. Every check, every wire, every withdrawal her mother had written down in a tight, sure hand and never once said aloud. Cycle 3 was the worst of the waiting, because Grant, sensing nothing, grew bold. He started telling people. Ruth called first, the mother's younger sister, Nora's aunt, a woman who had watched the years of just this once checks pass across the kitchen table and had never been asked her opinion of a single one. Your brother's been on the phone, Ruth said, telling the whole family you're in over your head. Says he's going to have to step in and, quote, sort out the mess before you cost everybody their inheritance. Is that what he says? That's what he says. Cousin Dale called me all worried. Wanted to know if we should, and I'm quoting him too, do something about Nora. Ruth's voice was dry as a creek in August. I told Dale to mind his own accounts. He hasn't balanced a checkbook since the Carter administration. Nora laughed. It surprised her, how easily it came. Let them think it, Ruth. You sure, honey? Because it stings, hearing it. Your own people. It stung for 51 years, Nora said. This is the first time it doesn't matter what they think. Let Grant tell them I'm drowning. Let him tell them all of it. She looked out the window at the little clapboard house next door, at the maple her father had planted the year she was born. The record doesn't care what anybody says about it. Ruth was quiet a moment. Della raised one soft child and one hard one, she said finally. I used to think you were the soft one. So did I, Nora said. That was the height of it. That was maximum. Grant, out there, sure as sunrise, telling relatives his invisible sister was in over her head, with no idea that at that very moment, a forensic accountant was cross-referencing his 19 years of loans against their dead mother's handwriting, and that the total was, line by careful line, assembling itself into a number he would not walk away from. Then, the day before the report was finished, Grant made his last move. He called, and this time Nora answered, because something in the pattern of the rings told her she should. I've been patient, Grant said. No hello. I've been more than patient. You've had 2 months, Nora, and there's nothing. No buyout. No distribution. Nothing. The estate has to be reconciled first. Marcus told you that. Marcus works for the estate. You are the estate. You could push this through in a week if you wanted to. His voice dropped into something colder, the voice under the voice. I talked to a lawyer of my own. Did you know an executor can be removed? For, what's the phrase he used? Failure to administer in a timely manner. You keep stalling. I file a petition. I have you removed, and I take over, and I close the house, and I do it the sensible way like I said from the start. There it was. The threat, finally, out loud. And it was so close. One day. If he filed tomorrow, if a judge granted even a temporary stay while the petition was heard, the reconciliation could be tangled for months. Everything Nora had set quietly running could be jammed at the last turn. She felt the old fear reach for her. She let it come, and then she let it go. You do what you have to do, Grant, she said. A pause. He'd expected panic. He'd expected the soft sister to fold. I mean it, he said, uncertain now. I know you do, Nora said. File your petition. I won't fight you on the timing. She almost smiled. I only ask one thing. Wait until Thursday. Marcus is filing something with the court that day anyway. Do it all at once. Save yourself a trip. What's he filing? Estate paperwork, she said. You'll get a copy. You're a beneficiary. Fine, Grant said, and she could hear him deciding he'd won, deciding her calm was surrender. Thursday, and Nora, this is your own fault. You made it hard. Good night, Grant, she hung up. Her hand was steady. She looked at the clock. It was 9:40, the same as the last time he'd called, and the time before that, as if her brother lived permanently at 20 minutes to 10. Always almost, always about to. She called Priya one last time. Thursday, Nora said. Can it be done by Thursday? It's done now, Priya said. I'm printing 3 copies of the bound report tonight. I checked the number 4 times. Do you want it? Just tell me it's real." "It's real," Priya said. "It corroborates against your mother's notebook on every material line. $296,400. 19 years. Every dollar documented. Every dollar undisclosed. And Nora, none of it ever repaid. Not once. There are 11 entries in her hand that say he'll pay it back. 11. In 11 different years." Nora sat with that. 11 times her mother had written those 4 words, hoping, and 11 times she'd been wrong. And she'd kept writing the number down anyway, never crossing anything out, keeping the faith that the record would matter to someone someday. "It matters, Mom," Nora said after she'd hung up, to the empty kitchen and the notebook on the shelf. "You were right to write it down. It matters." Thursday came bright and cold. The conference room at Della Crest had a long table of dark wood and a window that looked out over the Cedar Hollow Square. Marcus Della was already seated when Nora arrived, a folder squared precisely in front of him. Priya sat beside him, 3 bound reports stacked at her elbow, her face composed and unreadable. Nora took the chair at the end, the same end where, weeks ago, she'd sat holding a box of photographs. Grant came in 12 minutes late with a lawyer she didn't recognize. A young man in a suit a size too sharp, carrying a briefcase that looked like it had never held anything heavier than a lunch. Grant's own confidence walked in ahead of him. He clapped his lawyer on the shoulder, nodded at Marcus like a man greeting the help, and did not look at his sister at all. "Let's make this quick," Grant said, sitting. "I've got a closing at 2. I understand there's a petition to file and paperwork to sign, and frankly the sooner we all—" "Before we get to any petition," Marcus said, "the estate needs to present its reconciliation. As executor's counsel, I'm required to enter it into the record before any distribution or challenge is considered. It won't take long." Grant waved a hand. "Fine, the reconciliation. Sure," he leaned back. "Bottom line it for me. What's my half of the house worth, and when can I close?" Marcus slid a copy of the bound report across the table to Grant, and one to his lawyer. "This is a full forensic accounting of Raymond and Della Ashby's accounts, going back 19 years. Ms. Venkatasan conducted it at the executor's authorization. I'd ask that you look at it before you say anything else." Grant did not open it. His lawyer did. "Priya," Marcus said, "walk us through it." Priya opened her own copy without hurry. She had the manner of a woman reading a weather report. No heat, no edge, just the numbers, which needed no help from her. "The estate corpus," she began, "the total value of the estate at the time of death is approximately $1,150,000. The house, the accounts, the vehicles, the personal property. Under the will, that's split evenly. 2 beneficiaries, roughly $575,000 each." Grant's mouth moved toward a smile. $575, more than he'd hoped. However, Priya said, and turned a page, "In the course of reconciling the accounts, I identified a pattern of transfers from the parents' accounts to one beneficiary, Grant Ashby, beginning 19 years ago and continuing until 14 months before Della Ashby's death." The smile stopped moving. "These transfers took several forms," Priya went on. "Checks, cash withdrawals timed to deposits in Mr. Ashby's business accounts. 3 wire transfers. In the first 9 years, the amounts are smaller and irregular. In the last decade, they grow, and they cluster around dates that correspond to real estate transactions Mr. Ashby was involved in." She looked up once, at no one in particular. "The total of these transfers is $296,400. The room was very quiet. Grant's lawyer had stopped turning pages. Now Priya said, "A transfer alone doesn't tell you its nature. A parent may give a child money as a gift, and a gift is not counted against an inheritance. So the question is whether these were gifts or something else." She set her hand flat on the report. "For that, I had a second source. Della Ashby kept a notebook, a record, in her own hand, of every advance she made to her son. Dated, described, and in her own words characterized repeatedly as money to be returned. She opened the notebook, the blue spiral notebook, brought in an evidence sleeve now, though it was only a mother's notebook, and she read, Grant, $8,000 to cover the flip on Delroy Street. Grant, $12,500. Taxes, he's behind. Grant, $6,000, truck repair, don't tell your father. Priya turned a page. Grant, $15,000, the deal fell through. She turned another. And 11 separate entries across 11 different years, each reading the same 4 words. He'll pay it back. Nobody breathed. Every entry in this notebook, Priya said, closing it, matches a transfer in the bank records. Every one. The notebook is not a feeling. It's a ledger, and it establishes, line by line, that these were not gifts. They were advances. Loans, in the family's own language. None were ever repaid. She sat back. She was finished. She'd said it all in the voice of a woman reading rainfall totals, and that was what made it land like a stone through ice. Grant found his voice. It came out rough. This is... Okay. First of all. He looked at his lawyer, who was not looking back. First of all, that's a private thing. That's my mother's private, you can't just... It's an estate record, Marcus said quietly. It was found in the decedent's home by the executor and disclosed, as she is required to disclose material assets and claims. It's admissible. It's already entered. Entered? Grant's face did something complicated. Entered where? With the court, Marcus said. This morning. Before you arrived. Grant turned to Nora for the first time since he'd walked in. And Nora looked back at him, and she did not gloat, and she did not flinch. And later she would think that the not gloating was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and also the thing she was proudest of. Marcus, Grant said, not taking his eyes off his sister. Explain to me in plain English what she's done. Marcus folded his hands. Under Ohio probate law, an advance made by a parent to a child during the parent's lifetime, where there's evidence the parent intended it to count against the child's inheritance, is treated as an advancement. It's not a debt you write a check to repay. It's simpler than that. The amount is charged against your share of the estate, as if you'd already received it. Because in fact, you had. Say the number, Grant said. The estate is restored to its full value for the calculation, $1,150,000. Each half is approximately $575,000. Then your advancement, the $296,400 you already received over 19 years, is subtracted from your half, and your half alone. Marcus paused. Your net distribution from the estate is approximately $279,000. Your sister's share stands whole at approximately $575,000. The number sat in the middle of the table like a thing that had fallen from the ceiling. Grant did the arithmetic in his face. Nora watched him do it. Watched him arrive at the place where 575 became 279, where the money he'd already spent years ago, on flips that fell through and taxes he was behind on, and a truck he'd fixed in secret, came due all at once. Not as a bill he could dodge, but as a subtraction he could not. You can't be serious, he said. That money's gone. That was years ago. That's precisely the point, Priya said, not unkindly. You've had it for years. The estate is simply recognizing that you have. And then Nora spoke, for the first time since the meeting began, and she spoke quietly, in the level voice she'd found the morning after he'd handed her the box. Every dollar you borrowed, Grant, she said. You've just inherited it. As a debt. He stared at her. You told me to take the memories, she said. And you'd take the responsibility. Remember? In front of everyone. She let it sit. So I took the responsibility. I read every page. I counted every dollar Mom wrote down because she was too kind to say it to your face and too honest to pretend it didn't happen. That's what responsibility turned out to be. It turned out to be a notebook and a number. For a moment, Grant said nothing. His young lawyer cleared his throat and began, softly, Mr. Ashby, we should discuss. Dad wanted me to have that money. Grant said it fast, grabbing for it. the way a falling man grabs for a branch. You don't understand how it was. Dad and he knew I had opportunities. He wanted to help me build something. That money was help. It was a father helping his son. It wasn't a loan, it was, "Don't tell your father," Priya said. Grant stopped. "Line 41, Priya said, opening the notebook one more time. $6,000, truck repair. In your mother's hand, don't tell your father." She looked at him. "If your father knew and approved, why did your mother write that she was keeping it from him?" The silence that followed was different from the silences before. It was the silence of a room watching a story die. And into that silence, a chair moved. Casey stood up. Nora hadn't even registered that the girl had come in. She'd slipped through the door during Priya's walkthrough and taken a seat against the wall. And now she stood, 24 years old, pale, her hands at her sides. "Dad," Casey said. "Stop, Casey," Grant turned. "Honey, this doesn't concern the truck." Casey's voice shook and held. "I was there. I was 16. You told me Grandpa gave you the money for the truck and I should never bring it up because it would make him feel bad about the shop closing. That's what you told me. And I believed you. And I never brought it up, not once, and Grandpa died thinking." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "He didn't give you that money, did he?" "Grandma did. And she hid it from him. Because you asked her to." Grant's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I've watched you ask this family for money my whole life," Casey said. "And I watched you take a box of photos out of Aunt Nora's hands at the will reading like you were doing her a favor. And I said nothing. Because that's what we do. We say nothing." She looked at Nora, and something passed between them, steady and clean. "I'm done saying nothing." She sat back down. She was crying, but her back was straight. Grant looked around the table for an ally and found none. His lawyer was studying the report. Marcus was still. Priya had already gone back to her copy, making a small note in the margin, done with the whole matter. And Ruth had come too, Nora saw now, sitting quiet by the window, and Ruth was not gloating either, but there was a light in the old woman's eyes that had been waiting 19 years to shine. "I sat at that kitchen table," Ruth said, "to no one and to everyone, and watched your mother write you check after check with her hand shaking, telling herself you'd turn it around this time. Just this once," she'd say, and I'd say, "Della, it's never just once." And she'd say, "He's my boy." Ruth's voice thickened. "She's not here to see this. But by God, she wrote it down. She knew somebody would need to read it someday." She was right. Grant put both hands flat on the table, as if to push himself up or hold himself down. "So what happens now?" he said. Quiet, the confidence gone out of him like air from a tire. "I petition. I fight it." You can petition," Marcus said. "You can challenge the notebook's authenticity. Though I'll tell you as a professional courtesy that the handwriting is your mother's, the dates match the bank's own records, and the standard of evidence for an advancement in this state is not high. You would spend money you now understand you do not have to attack a document written by your dead mother in a courtroom, in front of a judge, and you would very likely lose. He let that land. Or you can accept the reconciled distribution, take your $279,000, which is a great deal of money, and close this." Grant's lawyer leaned to his ear and murmured something. Grant listened. His face, which had been so sure walking in, had the loose, emptied look of a man rebuilding his whole understanding of the last month in real time. Realizing that the slow sister he'd pitied had been 3 moves ahead the entire way, that the stalling he'd complained about was the sound of a machine he couldn't see, that the paperwork she'd told him to wait for on Thursday was the guillotine, and he'd told her to schedule it himself. "You knew," he said to her. "This whole time, every time I called. You knew." "Yes," Nora said. "You let me tell everyone you were drowning." "Yes, why didn't you say anything?" And this was the question she'd known would come, and she'd thought a long time about how to answer it, And in the end, the answer was simple. Because you wouldn't have paid it back, she said. You'd have had time to move it, hide it, argue it, tie it up. I didn't warn you for the same reason Mom didn't tell Dad. Not to be cruel, to make sure the truth survived long enough to be counted. She stood, and she gathered her copy of the report, and she squared it the way Marcus squared his folders. You handed me the memories, Grant. You should have looked in the box. Mom's notebook was under the photographs the whole time. Right where she left it. Right where you didn't bother to look. That last part wasn't quite true. She'd found the notebook in the phone drawer weeks later. But it was true in the way that mattered, and Grant would carry it for the rest of his life. The image of the ledger sitting under the photographs he'd shoved into her arms, and Nora let him keep it. Because some debts are paid in more than money. The petition was never filed. Grant's lawyer, in the hallway afterward, told him what it would cost to lose. And Grant, who had spent 19 years learning exactly what things cost, and never once what they were worth, did the arithmetic one final time and put his pen away. Because Nora had warned nothing and gloated nothing, there was nothing to fight. The court had the reconciliation. The reconciliation was clean. 2 weeks later, the judge entered the distribution as filed. $575,000 to Nora, $279,000 to Grant. And there was no drama in it at all. No gavel, no speech. Just a clerk's stamp on a quiet page, which was exactly as Nora had wanted it. The loud part had been Grant's from the beginning. The quiet part was hers. And the quiet part won. There was one more thing. Grant could not buy the house now. His reduced share and the leverage he'd built his life on would not stretch to cover half of Larch Street. And so it came back around to the same long, dark table where he'd handed her the box. And this time, it was Nora who slid a page across. I'll buy your interest in the house, she said, at full appraisal. Not the $60,000 under number you wanted me to sign. Fair, appraised. So the house stays in the family, and Mom's kitchen doesn't go to a stranger who'll tear out the formica. Grant looked at the page a long time. You don't have to do that, he said. At full. After all of it. You could lowball me the way I know what I could do, Nora said. I'm not you. He signed it. His hand, she noticed, was the one shaking now. And when it was done, he stood, and for a moment he looked like he might say something real, might reach across the 51 years of being the one who was seen to the sister who never was, and find some word for it. Nora, he said. Goodbye, Grant, she said. Not cruel, just done. And she picked up the signed page and squared it. And she left him standing at the table with the last of the confidence he'd walked in with all those weeks ago. Gone now. Spent like everything else. 10 months later, the light came honey-colored across the porch on Larch Street. It was the good hour, the one her father used to call quitting time even after the shop on Route 9 let him go. The hour when the maple threw its long shadow over the yard and the whole town seemed to exhale. Nora sat in the chair her mother used to sit in, with her mother's chipped blue mug warm in her hands, coffee going cool in the sweet, slow way it did when you weren't in a hurry to be anywhere. Inside, on the shelf by the kitchen phone, the blue notebook sat closed. She'd thought about putting it away in a drawer, out of sight. She'd decided against it. It had spent 19 years being kept quiet. It could spend the rest of its time in the open now, in the light, where a record ought to live. Her phone buzzed once on the arm of the chair. A voicemail. She knew before she looked whose it would be. 3 calls from Grant in the past 2 months, and this made the third, and she'd answered none of them. She played it, just to hear where he was. Nora, hey, it's me. The old easy laugh, thinner now. Listen, I'm not asking for much. I've got a thing lined up, a real one this time, and I just need a short-term thing to bridge it. Few weeks, tops, you know I'm good for it. A pause, and in the pause she heard him hear himself. You know Anyway, call me back. It's just a short-term thing. Just a short-term thing. Just this once. He'll pay it back. Different man, Same 4 words her mother had written down 11 times across 11 years. Hoping, Nora set the phone face down on the arm of the chair. She did not delete the message. She did not return it. She let it sit there the way you let a stone sit at the bottom of a clear pond, visible, harmless, going nowhere. A car turned onto Larch Street. Casey's little hatchback, the one that needed a muffler. She came every week now, sometimes twice, and she let herself in the side door and called out Aunt Nora. The way family does, the way that means the house is yours too. On the porch, Nora called back. Casey came out with 2 plates and the good news that she'd stopped at the market. I got the chicken you like. And those rolls. She dropped into the other chair, the one that had been Raymond's, and she put her feet up on the rail without asking, which was exactly right. Dad called me too, she said, after a while. The short-term thing. I heard. I didn't call back. You don't have to, I know. Casey watched the maple. I used to think being a good daughter meant saying yes to him. Took me 24 years to figure out it just meant telling the truth. She glanced over. Grandma figured that out, didn't she? That's what the notebook was. That's what the notebook was, Nora agreed. They sat. The light went from honey to amber. Somewhere down the block a screen door banged, and a dog answered a dog. And the ordinary evening closed over the little clapboard house that 3 decades of overtime had paid for, and that would not now be sold to a stranger. Nora thought about her mother's tight, sure hand, writing everything down, never crossing anything out, keeping the record for years without ever once saying a word, because she'd known somehow that the saying wasn't the point. The keeping was the point. A thing counted honestly and kept and set down in the open where the light could reach it. That was a kind of love too, quieter than a check. Slower than a favor. But it lasted, and the favors never did. Grant had taken the truck keys and the tools and the good name and the front seat at every table for 51 years, and he'd been sure, right up to the end, that no one had counted, that no one would dare. Someone had counted. Someone had dared. She'd just done it quietly, the way her mother taught her, in a notebook by the kitchen phone. Because that was the whole of it, the thing Nora understood now all the way down, sitting in her mother's chair in her mother's house, with her mother's mug going cool in her hands. What's quietly counted can never be quietly kept. She lifted the mug. The coffee was cold. She drank it anyway, and it was fine. Stay for dinner, she said. I'm already here, Casey said. And she was. And the light held a little longer over Larch Street, and inside on the shelf, the blue notebook sat closed in the open air. Its work finished. Its record kept. Right where anyone who cared to look could find it. Wherever you're watching from tonight, comment the name of your city. I'd like to know how far this one traveled.